At the will reading, the words still taste like copper as Mr. Carter clears his throat and says my name, and Ashley's smile cracks right down the middle. 4 days ago, she shoved my suitcase onto the porch after we buried my Michael, told me the house wasn't mine, and shut the door on my face. Now, under humming fluorescent lights and the stale smell of coffee and lilies, the lawyer slides a thick envelope across a glossy mahogany table, and my fingers shake as I see my son's handwriting on the tab. Ashley's French manicured nails tap, 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 then stop. Her mascaraed eyes dart to me, calculating, then panicked. Outside, rain needles the window of this little downtown office, and inside, my heart slams so hard I can hear it echo in the leather chairs. Per Michael's wishes, his mother, Patricia, retains a life estate in the house, Mr. Carter reads, and the room inhales as one. Ashley's breath catches, a small, strangled sound, like a wine glass cracking, and she whispers, "That's not possible," as if she can argue with ink and grief. I can still smell the bleach she used, scrubbing my son out of his own kitchen, the scent clinging to my sweater when she told me to go. Now the same sweater is damp at the cuffs from nervous palms. The flag outside the courthouse across the street snaps in the wind, and my wedding ring clicks against the table as I steady myself. The words executor and trust bloom like lifelines in a sea I thought would drown me. I'll tell you exactly how a woman who once called me Mom could toss me to the curb hours after a funeral, and how my boy, even in death, made sure I still had a key to the home we painted together. If you believe no mother should be erased from her own child's life, subscribe and stay with me. You won't want to miss what came next. When Mr. Carter says it, the room tightens and loosens all at once, like a breath held and released in a church pew. Life estate. The syllables feel foreign and familiar at the same time. My name hangs there, and Ashley's face does this tiny, involuntary thing. Her smile turns brittle, hairline fissures running from the corners of her mouth to her temples. 4 days ago, her hands had been so steady pushing my suitcase across the porch slats, my sweater catching on a splinter while she stood in the doorway and told me it was time for me to go. Now her fingers, those neat French tips with the almond sheen, hover above the table like dragonflies over a pond. Tap, tap, tap. Then nothing. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights sounds different, like they're whispering in a language only grief understands. I see Michael's handwriting on the tab of the envelope. The loop on the P in Patricia is a little too tall, the crossbar on the T done with a quick slash, the way he'd rushed through notes as a boy and handed them to me over the counter while I was packing his lunch. My fingers tremble because muscle memory is its own kind of mercy. I've opened 1,000 pieces of paper with that script on it. Permission slips, grocery lists, Mother's Day cards he drew with crayons that left waxy lines on the kitchen table. I never imagined the last one would come from a lawyer's office across from the courthouse on a rainy Tuesday, lilies still wilting on the reception desk. Per Michael's wishes, his mother, Patricia, retains a life estate in the house, Mr. Carter says, and you can hear the difference in the air. The rain against the window changes from needles to threads, long and pulling. In the pause, something inside me steadies. Ashley's breath catches with a sound like a glass resonating when you run a finger around the rim. "That's not possible," she whispers, and I watch the words land on the glossy mahogany and skid. I don't reach for them. I don't move. I just keep my palm flat on the cool surface and feel the ring I never took off. My husband's ring, gold thinning under the pad of my finger. Click, 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 as if reminding me I am not a ghost passing through my own life. Mr. Carter clears his throat. The deed was amended last year. The trust provides for maintenance and taxes. Ashley. He turns, gentle as if he's explaining weather and not a change in the force of someone's future. As residual beneficiary, you'll inherit the property subject to the life estate. Your rights begin after Patricia's passing. Until then, her right to occupy the residence is exclusive. The word exclusive slides into my chest like a soft blanket. Earlier, when I'd walked in here, the smell of coffee and copier toner had made me dizzy. Now I pick up the envelope with my son's name on it, and there's a thickness at the throat like swallowing back a storm. To keep from showing it, I let my eyes land on the courthouse across the street, the flag snapping itself awake in the rain, the white columns streaked with a darker gray. The same courthouse where Michael had paid the fee to get married in a hurry 8 years ago, laughing, cheeks pink from running up the steps because Ashley didn't like to be late. When I think of the house, I think of April. The year we painted it, Michael and I ate ham sandwiches on the front steps, our hands speckled pale green, pollen collecting on our arms like dust from new beginnings. The maple tree out front had just unfurled its leaves, the light easy and kind. I had taught him how to snap painter's tape straight along the baseboards, how to stir the can with slow, steady circles so you didn't invite bubbles. He was 16 and too tall for the ladder we had, and every time he stretched for the upper corner, I wanted to reach out and anchor him by the waist, pull him back to the ground, and tell him to stay where I could see him. It's funny what your mind will drag into the present when the ground under you shifts. 4 days ago, when the mourners had just driven away with their empty pans and plastic wrap tightly pressed over casserole leftovers, I stood in the kitchen that smelled like bleach and lilies in equal measure. And I reached for the sponge, because that's what my hands know how to do. Clean. Keep moving. Keep standing. Ashley came in, her heels soft on the tile, and her eyes already red from the day and what came next. "We need to talk about boundaries," she said, a phrase that drops like a weight when someone is about to move the furniture of your life without asking. "I'll strip the beds," I had said, because I had learned to meet sharpness with tasks. "We can have the sheets ready for—" No. She didn't step closer. She didn't touch me. The dishwasher hummed, and somewhere a clock ticked. She looked past me to the refrigerator, where the magnets with pictures I'd stuck up over the years had been replaced by a sterile stainless steel door, fingerprints wiped clean. Michael's school photo, the one with the cowlick that never obeyed, gone. The Polaroid of the Thanksgiving table where he and I had carved the turkey together, gone. "I need you to pack your things," Ashley said, her voice brittle as frost. "This is my house." I had looked at the kitchen window and the maple tree swaying under a sky heavy with weather. "It's Michael's," I said, and I heard the flaw in the sentence as it came out, a present tense that felt like treason. Was. It was Michael's. The correction landed between us like a pane of glass. "It's mine," she repeated, softer, like a lullaby turned upside down. "He left it to me. He told me, I can't have you here. Not right now. I can't breathe. I know about suffocation. When Michael was 10 and had an asthma attack in the middle of the night, I sat in the ER and counted the seconds between breaths and made promises to every name of God I could remember. I know about wanting space. But standing there with my damp hands and the taste of onions from the casserole we hadn't touched, looking at the corner of the table where Michael had nicked the wood with a set of keys, our own little teardrop of history, I felt something inside me go quiet. I went to the guest room that still smelled like the lavender sachet I'd kept in the drawer for years and folded my sweaters into the suitcase my sister had given me before she moved to Florida. I took the photograph of Michael as a baby from the nightstand and slid it between shirts so the glass wouldn't break. And when I carried my bag to the porch, Ashley held the door open and the wind took a piece of my hair and pressed it to my forehead. My feet make a small sound on the sidewalk outside Mr. Carter's office now, a whisper on wet concrete. The rain is polite today, a steady tap that reminds you to look down when you walk. It's a relief after the hum of the building, the way grief echoes in empty hallways and conference rooms, bouncing off diplomas and book spines. I want to sit somewhere quiet. I want to hold the envelope and not open it yet. The car is where I can be alone with him for a minute, without anyone measuring what that looks like. Inside the Honda, the fabric seat prickles through my coat. I press the letter to my lap, and I don't pull the tab. He wrote my name. He wrote it, and that is enough for this exact second. Mr. Carter had slid a second set of papers out onto the table after Ashley's whisper and the room's inhale. "The trust covers taxes and insurance," he said, careful with each word, knowing that once you say them, they begin to arrange themselves into a life. Routine maintenance. Major repairs require consent from both beneficiary and life tenant. Utilities are to be arranged as usual. The executor. Who? Ashley's voice was a thin string. Daniel Reed. Mr. Carter looked at me and then at her. Michael's friend from the plant. Daniel had eaten meatloaf at my dining room table more times than I could count when the boys were in high school. He was the one who drove Michael to his first job interview because our old Buick wouldn't start that morning. He is the kind of person who returns tools better than when he borrowed them, cleaned and wrapped. Ashley had blinked slowly, her mascara unframing her eyes just a fraction. Michael would not do this. She didn't talk to me, though I was 2 feet away. She didn't look at my hands or at my son's name on the paper. She looked at Mr. Carter like, professionals are outposts of reason you can negotiate with if you're wearing the right shoes. He said he wanted me to have freedom. Her hand went to her throat, where a fine chain disappeared into the neckline of her blouse. The same chain I'd given her at Christmas the first year I used the word daughter without tripping over it. Mr. Carter folded his hands. He also said, and I quote, "My mother kept me inside that house when storms came. She'll always have a key there." He asked that you both honor this. I had met Ashley when she was 24, her hair caramel and glossy and pinned behind one ear with a barrette that sparkled like it belonged to a girl at a winter dance. She brought me a pumpkin pie across the threshold on a metal pie tin and called me Mom the second time she visited on account of her own mother living 2 states away. The word made my chest warm, like stepping into the sun after a cold grocery store freezer aisle. She lined up bottles in my pantry one weekend, all the labels facing forward, and laughed when she caught me looking at them with surprise. "My little trick," she said, tapping the front of a jar with her fingernail, the sound crisp, "makes everything easier to find." There were signs after that. Little ones. She told me, gently at first, that Michael and she needed space, that their weekends were full, that perhaps they could come for Sunday dinner less often. "It's a lot for him, the drive," she'd say, even though we lived 12 minutes apart. At Thanksgiving, she insisted we move the table to the other wall because the light was better for photographs. She swapped the embroidered napkins my mother had stitched in the 70s for paper ones because it's just easier. I don't mind paper napkins. I do mind erasure. But at the time, I told myself it was fine because Michael was smiling in the pictures, and when I found my own face, a little tight around the mouth, I scolded myself to be gracious, to be modern, to be the kind of mother-in-law people talk about with gratitude at baby showers. When I was 19 and Michael was an idea we were still practicing, saying out loud, my husband Tom worked nights loading pallets, and I took a part-time job at the grocery store bakery, even though I'd planned to finish my community college classes that spring. I told myself it would be 1 semester off. Then I told myself 1 year. The apron they gave me smelled like sugar and yeast and something burnt, and I learned to ice cupcakes with a twist of the wrist so the swirl sat just right. My feet hurt, and my back complained, and my hands were always a little sticky. On the nights Tom got home at 4 and kissed the top of my head where I had fallen asleep over the bills, I told myself later. When Michael was little and his ears ached through the winter and we spent money we didn't have at the clinic, I told myself later. Later became the rhythm of our family, and when Tom died of a heart problem we didn't see coming, I took the future out of the closet and looked at it, and it had a smaller shape than I remembered, so I made it wide in other ways. I volunteered at the school library when I could. I learned which baseball fields had the least dust that would settle in Michael's lungs. I took shifts when people called in sick and said yes when the boss asked if I could do holidays because I knew my boy wanted a pair of sneakers that cost too much and I wanted him to have them anyway. I gave him the world we could afford and the rest in promises I tried not to break. When Michael got promoted at the plant, he called me from the parking lot and shouted into the phone like he was telling me from a mountaintop. "Ma, we did it," he said, which made me laugh through tears because he was a man with his own apartment and a girlfriend and a beard that made him look older. But still, he said, "we." That same year, I took money from the little account where I kept pretending my community college classes slept, and I gave it to him for a down payment so he and Ashley could buy the house with the maple tree. It's a loan, I told him, even though we both knew it wasn't. Pay me back in Sunday dinners. Pay me back in letting me plant tulips along the walkway. He had nodded and squeezed my hand hard enough to make the bones sing. Deal, he said. But I'm painting, and you hate the mess. He was right about the mess. He was wrong about me hating it with him there beside me. When Ashley moved in, she brought a box labeled Memories in neat marker script. She put it in the back of the closet I'd cleared the year before for winter coats. Inside were picture frames with faces I hadn't met, a ceramic angel, 2 baby teeth in a tiny velvet box that belonged to someone who grew up in a different living room. I offered her the top shelf because it seemed like the kind thing to do. You're generous, she said, and kissed my cheek. It was later, when Christmas came, and my nativity set stayed in the attic because our thing this year is minimalism, that I began to understand that for some people, generous means quiet. There are 100 small ways people can make you feel like a guest in your own life. It starts with comments you tell yourself you misheard. It grows into calendars filled without your name. It arrives as a key you used to have that doesn't fit a lock you didn't know was changed. The night before the funeral, when I reached for the knob on the door between the kitchen and the garage, my hand met resistance. Someone had turned the deadbolt. Safety, Ashley said, walking by with a stack of programs for the service, her perfume trailing in the air like a ribbon. We live in a world where you have to be careful. In the car, the envelope still in my lap, I watched droplets race each other down the windshield, joining and splitting, making quick decisions without thinking about it. When you are 67, decisions feel like artifacts buried under layers you have to brush away with care. They are still there, though. When the rain slows, I turn the key, and the engine comes to life with a cough and a willingness I do not take for granted. I am going home. The papers in the folder say I can. The line where my name is printed says I can. But more than that, the way Michael wrote the P in Patricia tells me I can. The drive down Maple Avenue has always been a comfort. Houses with porches where people wave without knowing your name, the gas station on the corner where Mr. Lewis has kept the same bell on the door since I was young, the Methodist church with a sign out front that changes by season. Autumn hymns, winter coat drives, summer rummage sales. Today, the damp sits on everything like a quiet thought. The house comes into view, its siding a kind of soft yellow we argued about and then smiled over. When I pull into the driveway, I half expect to see Michael's truck. I still do that, look for what isn't there, and catch myself asking if I have lost my mind. Ashley's car is parked crooked, the way she does when she's carrying something heavy and doesn't want to spend the extra second straightening. There's a piece of paper folded under the wiper blade, what looks like a brochure from a real estate office, the corner of a logo peeking out. My stomach drops a little, and then I breathe the way I taught Michael when he was a boy. In through the nose, count to 4, out through the mouth, longer than you think you can manage. I get out of the car and stand for a second in the drizzle, letting it touch my face like a benediction. The key fits. It turns. The sound of the latch sliding back is a relief so sudden tears spring up without my permission. Inside, it smells like that cleaner with the blue flowers on the bottle and a hint of something fried from last night. The entry table is bare. The bowl where we used to toss keys is gone. In the living room, the rug has been rolled up and there are boxes along the wall labeled in Ashley's precise print: dining room, donate, office. There's a thrum in the background I recognize before I place it. The central air is running on a setting too low for the season. The house feels cold, like a store that wants to keep you awake long enough to buy something you didn't come in for. Ashley comes out of the kitchen with her phone in her hand, and for a second, her face is a map of expressions: surprise, concern, something else I don't have a word for. You can't just come in, she says, and it's not a shout. It's softer, which somehow lands harder. I can, I say, lifting the folder so the corner peeks out. I wanted to talk. We talked, she says, glancing at the counters as if trying to locate a version of her day where I am not standing in the doorway. Patricia, I have an appointment in 20 minutes. I'm meeting. Not that I owe you, but I'm meeting someone to discuss next steps. This place needs work. She gestured vaguely at the ceiling where a little crack lives, benign and older than her. And grief is making me useless. I need a plan. I know about plans, I say. And about grief. And about this ceiling. It's superficial. The real problem is the flashing on the back porch. It has needed resealing since last summer. Michael and I were going to... The sentence collapses under its own weight. We're going to. We had the caulk gun ready. The cord is still on the shelf in the garage, coil asleep. She sees the wobble and presses on. Look, she says, placing the phone face down on the counter like that makes this more human. I don't want to fight with you. Michael loved you. He wanted you to be okay, but he would not want you to put your health at risk. You're not young. The stairs are not steep, I say. We walk them every day, Michael and I, up to the small room where he used to play video games and where I keep the box of ornaments we didn't use last year. And you have a place, she says. Your sister said you could come down to Clearwater and stay as long as you want. There are communities, nice ones. You'd have friends. It's true. My sister had called me with her soft Florida voice and offered a bed and an Afghan crocheted in colors that don't match. A sweet woman at church had pressed my hand and said her niece runs a senior living complex with bingo on Thursdays. These are good options. It's also true that I have a right to open my own front door. Ashley, I say, saying her name like a bridge, like if I put it out there we can meet on it. He made arrangements. She folds her arms and looks at a spot over my shoulder. People make arrangements when they're scared, she says. They say things and sign things and then they're gone and the people left behind have to live with words they weren't ready for. She isn't wrong about fear. They had sat in that very kitchen in late spring when the scans came back with little shadows that turned out to be merciless in their pace. And they had made a list. Not because they were ready, but because readiness is a story you tell yourself so you can buy garbage bags and make phone calls. He made them anyway, I say, and I lay the papers on the counter and slide my fingertips to the edge of the envelope with my name. He wrote that he wanted me to have a key. She laughs once, and it isn't unkind. It's surprised and tired. He did always think of you in metaphors. Then she shakes her head, and her hair settles back into place. I have a meeting. Would you? She gestures toward the door. Stay, I say, and she looks at me like I've spoken a language she doesn't understand. Stay, I say again, more firmly. In your meeting words, I will be occupying the residence. That's the phrase Mr. Carter used. We'll work out the rest. Something like annoyance flashes and then is washed over by something that looks like calculation. Fine, she says, like a pebble dropped in a bucket. We'll talk after. I'll be back at 2. She grabs a folder from the island, her phone, and a scarf, even though the air outside is warming. At the door, she stops. Don't touch my things, she says. It's not the sentence itself. It's the way she says my like she is drawing a circle around everything with chalk. After she leaves, the house exhales. It has always done that for me, always known how to hold me up. I put the envelope with my name on the coffee table and look at the dent in the cushion where Michael used to sit and watch the news, arguing with the television in a voice I can still hear. I run my hand along the back of the couch and feel the texture catch on my skin. In the kitchen, I find the kettle in a new place because things migrate under the rule of someone else, but it's still the kettle from the wedding registry list Michael and Ashley made, still the same whistle when it begins to boil. There is a tea bag left in the box I bought last month, the corner of it folded in the way I always do. A small private order among a world where I have control over so little. While the water heats, I open cabinets and note what's changed and what hasn't. The mug with the chip in the rim is gone, probably tossed, and I feel a flash of something that might be shallow to mourn, and yet I do. The good plates are stacked where the cereal bowls used to be. The smell of bleach is softer but present, a ghost of a ghost. On the counter, there's a page torn from a legal pad with a list. Call plumber, get quote for flooring, declutter. My name is not on the list, neither is his. There are sacrifices you make that no one sees. The year Michael had braces, I took a second shift on Mondays and Wednesdays and let my hands ache because I liked how straight his smile was and how he laughed wider without his lips pressing in. The summer the roof needed replacing, I sold the little diamond studs Tom had bought me for our 10th anniversary and told myself I didn't like earrings anyway because they made my earlobes itch. When Ashley's car broke down 2 winters ago, I gave her mine and took the bus for 3 months without telling anyone because the seat by the window was a good place to read, and the woman who got on at 3rd Street always brought her granddaughter and sang little songs under her breath, and you can miss things like buses when they are gone. I did these things without keeping score because love, at least the kind I want to practice, isn't a ledger. But sitting there with the list in Ashley's handwriting and the kettle beginning to murmur, I understand the difference between not keeping score and letting yourself be erased. I carry the cup into the living room and sit on the couch. And for the first time since the service, I let the quiet fill the room without trying to make it do tricks. The envelope waits. I slide a finger under the flap and lift. Inside is a letter on white paper with the letterhead from the plant because my son's sense of steadiness extended to things like not buying stationery when there was perfectly good paper under your hand. His pen strokes are heavier than they used to be, like he was pressing the pen harder to keep the lines steady. Ma, it starts. Not mom, not mother, not Pat. Ma, the syllable he used when he was small, and when he was a teenager asking for gas money, and when he became a man who still wanted to call me from the grocery store to ask which brand of tomato sauce tasted most like home. If you are reading this, then we did the thing you and I never wanted to do, which is talk about after. I don't like writing it, but I like worse the idea of you standing on a porch without a key. There are things Ashley and I didn't agree on. That is true. She is good at her own life, Ma. She has plans. She also has a way of moving fast when I wanted slow, and I was slow about things like asking for help and making decisions. So I'm making this one the way you taught me to, with care. You kept the walls of that house upright when I was too small to hold a hammer. I want there to always be a place where your mug sits in the cabinet and your sweater is on the back of the chair. Stay as long as you want. Call Daniel when something leaks. Love the maple tree for me. I'll see you in 1,000 small ways. Michael. I cry then, because there are permissions we don't know we need until they are given. The tea goes lukewarm while I fold the letter back along the crease he made and smooth it out again, my hand lingering over the loops and lines like they are something I can wear. I think of him as a boy with jam on his chin and the way he used to tilt his head when he asked me why the sky did what it did. I think of the day he introduced me to Ashley in the bakery aisle of the grocery store where I used to work, and how his face lit up like he was handing me a new book he knew I'd love. I think of the hospital room and the smaller courage of paper and signatures and words like trust and executor. At 1:48, Ashley's car pulls into the driveway. The sound of the garage door coming up is loud in the quiet, and then she is standing in the doorway again, this time emptied of rush. Her eyes land on the letter in my hand. I have the sudden, foolish urge to cover it with my palm so she can't see it, as if it's a secret love note and not what it is. A son managing a care he cannot carry with his own hands anymore. I met with a realtor, she says, before sitting. She says the market is good, that if we do certain updates we can... She stops because even she hears the sentence crash into the fact of me. She looks at the envelope again, at Michael's name. Something tightens and then loosens in her face. He wrote to you, she says, and it isn't a question. He did, I answer. I do not tell her what he said. Not because it's ammunition, but because it is a thread I intend to save for the days I feel frayed. Ashley takes a breath like she's about to dive into water and says, I didn't know about this. She palms the air, and I know she's talking about more than paper. I thought I could make choices without negotiating all the time. She inhales and lets the sentence go. I never wanted to hurt you, Patricia. I take that and hold it like a candle in a draft. I believe that, I say, because I do. Intention matters, but so does outcome. But you did. She looks at me, surprised at the simplicity. sometimes stating the weather is the only way to decide if you should take a sweater. I did, she says, and her voice isn't brittle. Then, with that flinty flash I have come to recognize, she adds, I still have to think about my life. Yes, I say, and I have to think about mine. We sit there with the space between us like a kitchen table where hard things get said. Outside, a neighbor walks past with a dog that goes by the name of Scout, and the dog pauses at the maple tree and considers it with the seriousness dogs reserve for trees. The world continues even when your world stops. It's both comfort and insult. We need ground rules, Ashley says after a moment, slipping back into language that feels safe for her. If you're staying, which I hear you are, temporarily. She says the last word like sugar substitute, meant to taste like kindness, but somehow not quite. There are rules in the papers, I say, nodding to the folder, and there are rules that aren't written. I look at my hands, at the fine lines that cross them like a map of back roads, and I think of boundaries that protect instead of exclude. I won't touch your things. You won't move mine without asking. We'll settle bills with the trust and the usual. You can have your meetings. I can have my mornings. She looks at me for a long time. Your mornings? My coffee, the front steps, the birds, a walk to the corner and back. I've been told routine is good for the heart. It's my joke, and not a joke. She smiles without meaning to. Fine, she says. Mornings. And you can tell your realtor, I add, to save her cards. For now. Patricia, she starts, that tone that tells me she is suited up in her arguments and ready to run plays. But she stops herself. It is a small miracle, the equivalent of lightning hitting a far-off field and not setting anything on fire. For now, she says instead. There is a conflict coming. I can feel it like thunder so far away the dog doesn't yet hear it. There will be conversations about repairs, about where the Christmas boxes live, about what we do with the room that used to be Michael's office, and the stacks of papers he left with paper clips arranged like small metal wings. There will be a day when this arrangement will feel impossible, and I will want to get in the car and drive to Florida and sit under my sister's palm tree and let myself be pampered in a thin way that feels like rest. There will be a day when Ashley will try a new kind of pressing and call it concern. I am not naive, but there is also this. Me in my house, at my age, with my letter, making tea while it rains and telling the walls that held my boy that I intend to honor his quiet, ordinary courage by letting myself belong. That night I sleep in the guest room, the lavender sachet a faint echo. I run my hand along the quilt I made when Michael went off to work his first job. Squares cut from his t-shirts, the ones with logos from school plays and baseball tournaments. The window is open a fraction to let in the cool, and I listen to the leaves rub together in the tree we planted the year we moved in. In the morning, I wake before the house and make coffee in the kitchen that is and is not mine, and carry it out to the front steps. I sit and wrap my sweater around me like a memory and watch the light arrive. Mrs. Holloway from 2 doors down waves when she walks by, her visor set low and her sneakers white against the damp sidewalk. She slows, looks at the house, looks at me. She opens her mouth and then closes it, and then says finally, quite simply, good. I nod. Good. A word that does not mean perfect. A word that does not erase what came before. A word that is, at the very least, a place to begin. The cup is warm in my hands. A car passes with a song slipping out of its open window, a tune I can't catch but recognize as willing. I think of Ashley upstairs, the way you can hear the shower in the pipes when someone turns it on, the way the house learns the rhythms of different lives. I think of Michael and his note, and the way he said we did it the day he got the promotion, folding me into his joy like a chair added to the table. On the kitchen counter, next to the folder with its hard edges, I place a small bowl. It is blue and chipped on one side, and I set it there knowing it is a tiny declaration. This is where my keys will go. A place that says there is a door I have a right to walk through. A door that opens to a room where both love and discomfort will live for a while. The bigger fight will come. It always does. Some conflicts are just grief learning to speak in a new tone. Others are about power. I am old enough now to tell the difference. Old enough to choose what I will spend my energy on. Old enough to know when to hold a letter to my heart and when to lay it down and make breakfast. I crack eggs into a pan. I butter toast. When Ashley comes down, she pauses at the sight of plates in their places and steam curling up slow. She opens her mouth and then closes it, and then pulls out a chair like a truce. For a few minutes, we eat quietly, the clink of fork against plate the only language we need. Outside, the maple gives a shiver, and the sun catches on the leaves just so, a small, everyday miracle you could miss if you didn't know the house well. I know the house well. I intend to keep knowing it. Ashley rinsed her plate and set it in the dishwasher with the precision of someone lining up checkers and planning 3 moves ahead. "I'll be home late," she said, not looking at me. "I scheduled a consultation, decluttering. They'll be here around 4 to give me an estimate. You don't need to engage. I can handle it." The word decluttering landed in my chest the way a small rock drops in shallow water. More noise than depth, but still a disturbance. I had spent a lifetime learning what to keep and what to let go. It wasn't the piles that weighed a person down. It was the stories attached to them. "I'll be here," I said. "The trust says I'll be here." She didn't answer that. She reached for her scarf and fluffed it around her neck, even though the day was warming, then paused at the bowl I'd set on the counter. Her fingers brushed the chipped rim. "This doesn't match," she said gently, almost to herself, and then turned toward the door. 2 o'clock gave me a window," she added. "I'll be back between 3:30 and 4. After she left, the house silenced itself as if listening. Some homes have that ability. They pay attention the way a dog does when you enter a room and think you are quiet. I stood with my hands on the back of a chair and looked around like a person trying to remember which suitcase she put her favorite sweater in. The light came through the big living room window in a diagonal that touched the corner of the coffee table and lay there like a hand. I took a breath. There are breaths that feel like practice and breaths that feel like claiming. This one was the latter. I washed the plates, even though Ashley had set hers in the dishwasher. I moved slowly. The papers from Mr. Carter were a weight and a buoy both. I left the envelope with Michael's letter tucked inside on the table under the window and went to the hall closet. The closet had been reorganized. Coats hung facing the same way, the hangers all matched, black plastic with small dimples to catch slippery sleeves. The basket where we used to toss scarves was gone. On the top shelf sat plastic bins labeled seasonals and accessories and emergency. Emergency what? I wondered. I pulled a step stool from the laundry and climbed up to see. Inside, emergency was a flashlight and 2 batteries still in their plastic, a small first aid kit, a roll of duct tape, and, inexplicably, a tiny bag of cinnamon hearts like the kind you buy around Valentine's Day. I put the flashlight back, the little kit, the duct tape, the candy. I moved the bin to the side and slid my hand along the back of the shelf. It was there I found something I hadn't known I was looking for. A spare key on a ring with a maple leaf charm, old and scratched at the edges. Michael had given me that key when he and Ashley closed on the house. "You'll always have one," he'd said, pressing it into my palm the way a person gives you a stone before you cross a stream. "I won't be home the next time the cable guy comes on a 4-hour window," he'd added, smiling, but he'd looked at me with seriousness, hiding under the joke. A little boy in a man's face asking me to stay. I sat on the step stool in the closet, like it was a pew, and let the memory ring me like a bell. The little maple leaf was a cliché, maybe. There is no shortage of maple images in a town where a tree like ours stands on every other lawn. But it was ours. I slid the ring onto a thin red ribbon from a basket of wrinkled bows I kept for gift wrapping and tied it around my neck, the key warm against my collarbone. When I tucked it under my sweater, it lay there like a small answer. The garage smelled like cut wood and rain. On one wall, Michael had installed a pegboard because he liked order disguised as improvisation. The outlines of tools sketched in black marker still showed where the hammer hung, where the level rested, where the little hand saw with the teeth he used to count as a boy lived when it waited for a task. Some places you clean because you're proud. Some places you leave alone because they are altars to something you don't want to disturb. On the shelf near the back, under a tarp that had been folded but not secured, I found the old coffee can where Michael kept paintbrushes soaking in mineral spirits back when he and I were painting rooms every season as if color could chase away winter. I lifted the lid. The smell lifted back, not unpleasant if you held it at arm's length. I dug gently and found what I didn't know had been praying to be found. The brush with the pale green dried along the ferrule, the bristles splayed at the tip from reaching into corners. It was the brush we used on the trim in April years ago, the brush he held like a pencil, tongue caught between his teeth as he concentrated on making the line straight. I rinsed it in the utility sink as if waking a sleeping cat. The dried paint would never return to virgin white bristles, but I wasn't after new. I wanted evidence. I set the brush in a mason jar on the counter by the door when I came back in, next to the blue bowl. A key on a ribbon at my throat, a paintbrush in a jar by the door, a letter folded where the light could find it. Sometimes you make altars out of practical things, and they become your courage. At 3:30, a white van pulled into the driveway, the kind with clean, sans serif lettering on the side and a phone number that promised free estimates. 2 women and a man came to the door wearing polos with a logo in the corner over their hearts. They were cheerful in their efficiency, carrying tablets and tape measures, and a language that sounded gentle but felt like a broom. "Hi," one of the women sang. She had a glossy ponytail and a ring on her hand so large it turned with gravity. "We're with ClearSpace. Ashley?" She leaned slightly to look past me as if I were a curtain. "She'll be here any minute," I said. "You can come in." They stepped in as if stepping onto a moving walkway. One scanned the ceilings as if reading weather. The man's eyes landed on the stacked boxes along the wall. "We can take all that, no problem," he said, tapping a screen. "We're not taking anything," I said. "We're looking. Ashley scheduled you. We'll be deciding together." "Of course," the ponytail said, her voice syrupy sweet enough to make you forget sugar is dense. "We love families. We help families all the time when there's been—" She lowered her voice a fraction. "A transition." Michael's face flashed in my mind, his smile never meant to be past tense. Transition is what schools call it when kids move from one grade to the next. It isn't what I call a person leaving the world you're in and stepping into a place you can't follow. Ashley breezed in then, cheeks bright from the outside, the consultant persona switching on like a lamp. She clasped the ponytail woman's hands. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I have a very full situation, and grief fog is real." I stood there with the jar and the brush and my key resting against my chest and listened as they moved through the rooms, making lists with cheerful voices. Bedroom. Remove queen bed, too big for space. Guest room. Donate quilts. Living room. Replace couch, rug, stain. Kitchen. Declutter counter, bowl, jar, papers. Shelves. Remove personal photographs. Garage. Toss broken chairs, paint, tools. "Excuse me," I said at one point when the man pointed at the quilt on the guest bed, the one stitched from Michael's shirts, and said something about dated patterns. Ashley's head turned, the consultant's smile tightening a fraction. "Patricia," she said in a tone that made my own name sound like a misstep. "We are exploring." "The quilt stays," I said simply. The ponytail woman blinked, recalibrating. "Of course," she said quickly. "Keepsake. We can make a memory box for items like that." "I don't need a box to remember," I said. My voice didn't rise, it didn't shake, but there must have been something in it because even the man with the tablet looked at me and really saw me for the first time. Ashley exhaled. "We'll reconvene," she said to them, professional again. "Send me your estimate." After they left, she stood at the counter and gathered the papers that weren't messy to me. She lifted the blue bowl with 2 fingers. "This can go in a cabinet," she said, and waited. "It can stay right there," I answered, placing my hand gently on the edge of the counter. "For my keys." "I am trying," she said, voice thin, "to make a home I can survive in." "So am I," I said, and that widened the space between us like a hinge opening a door. 2 evenings later, 3 things happened in quick succession that felt small and petty and also like rain collecting into a storm. First, the internet went down. I called the company from the number on the back of the router and listened for 12 minutes to a recorded voice telling me to unplug and replug and wait. When I finally got to a person, she asked the account name. Michael, I said, and then corrected myself because grief is a trickster. Ashley Reed. I see the account, the woman said. Service was terminated pending move. It is not, I said. We are not moving. I'm showing a disconnect order, she said, her voice kind but far away. Would you like to schedule a new installation? The line clicked, and the silence whispered a familiar truth. You can't argue with a computer. You can, however, call a human who will pick up, even if he is washing grease off his hands and answers with a lilt of surprise. Pat? Daniel said when he saw my name on his phone. You okay? I told him about the internet and the decluttering and the bowl. I told him about the key on my chest and the paintbrush by the door. I didn't tell him about how lonely it feels to exist in the space between being polite and taking up room. I didn't need to. He heard it in the way I took breaths between sentences. I'll come by, he said, and I'll check the porch flashing while I'm at it. Michael was going to guilt me about that forever if I didn't. The second thing that happened was a large postcard arriving in the mail addressed to current resident, announcing a pre-listing exclusive open house this Saturday, 2 to 4 p.m., with a photograph that looked suspiciously like our living room, minus the frames I had put back, and plus a white vase that had never lived here. The name of the real estate agency was printed in gold, the kind of font that makes you think something is already decided. The third thing was Mrs. Holloway from 2 doors down, stopping by on her way back from Walking Scout. Ashley asked me to spread the word, she said, her visor sheltering her eyes from a sun that wasn't even being rude. She said it would be casual, just neighbors, to see changes. She said you knew. She tucked a stray hair behind her ear and looked at my face with that earnest worry some people wear well. Do you? I did not. I stood there with the postcard and felt heat rise like a blush you didn't invite. It wasn't the open house itself. Houses open and close. It was the word exclusive in our small town, where porches were made for the opposite. It was the pre in pre-listing, like an afterthought that goes first. Thank you, I said to Mrs. Holloway. Will you come? Of course, she said, as if the question were about water, not walls. I called Mr. Carter because words on paper are only as strong as the mouths willing to repeat them. He answered with a calm hello. I told him about the postcard. I asked him carefully if I was in the wrong to feel the way I did. You have the right to occupy, he said, the legal phrase he carried like a lantern. That includes reasonable enjoyment of the residence. You are under no obligation to vacate for an open house. You may object. Better yet, you may counter-program. Counter-program, I repeated, the word foreign and delightful on my tongue like a flavor I might learn to like. Like on television, when 2 networks schedule their best movie on the same night? He laughed softly. Something like that. You could choose to have a gathering, not to antagonize, to claim, invite your community. Make your presence in the home visible and undeniable. Invite Ashley. Invite me if you like. Invite Daniel. Bake something that makes the place smell like the place it is. I hung up and stood at the kitchen sink with the phone still in my hand. Outside, the maple flickered in the late afternoon light like it had news and wasn't sure whether to share it. I untie the red ribbon around my neck and retie it tighter, the key like a small heart sitting there. I looked at the paintbrush in the jar. It wasn't decoration, it was a tool. And I heard Michael in my head, laughing when we got a little paint on the floor and saying, "It's our house, Ma. We'll make our marks." I wrote 15 notes on index cards from the drawer where we keep rubber bands and battery chargers that belong to things we don't own anymore. I addressed them to the people who had fed us and prayed for us and watched Michael grow up and offered to sit with me when my knees ached on Sundays. "Come by Saturday at 2, I wrote. "We're planting a little plaque by the maple for Michael and telling stories. Bring a dish. Bring yourself. No pressure. Just us." I walked them down the block because some invitations you don't trust to the mail. People smiled and put a hand on my arm and asked if they could bring their famous mac and cheese or their grandmother's potato salad, and I said, yes, please, be as exactly yourself as you can be. I called Daniel. He said he'd bring folding chairs and a cooler and himself. He also said quietly, Ashley called me about buying out the life estate. What did you tell her? I asked, even though I knew. I told her that isn't how this works, he said. That we honor the paper and the spirit. That we'd fix the flashing and not break the house. I made 2 pies that night even though it was a weekday and my back complained. The kind of apple pie that makes the house smell like a memory you can eat. I took down the box marked Donate that had found its way to the top of the hall table and opened it. Inside were frames I had set back on the mantel, 2 of Michael's old baseball caps, the chipped mug I had mourned, and the small ceramic cat that had lived on the windowsill next to the sink since my sister gave it to me when we were 25 and thought knickknacks could bind a life. I put the mug in the dishwasher. I put the caps on the hooks by the door. I set the cat back on the sill. It looked out at the maple like an old friend returned from a field trip. In the morning, Ashley came downstairs and stopped in the doorway, the scent of apples rising like warm air. We have a no-sugar plan, she said automatically, then sniffed and closed her eyes for a second, the way people do when something beloved comes around the corner. I invited people, I said, wiping my hands on a towel. Saturday at 2. Her eyes opened. Patricia. To plant a small plaque by the maple, I said. To tell stories. To claim what's ours in the way of casseroles and folding chairs. I have, she said slowly. A thing then. I saw the postcard, I said. We'll do both. This is a neighborhood, people can choose. They'll be confused, she said. They're quite clever, I said. And it hung between us like a paper lantern, soft and lit, and not quite argumentative. Her mouth set. Please don't make this harder. There are moments when the past and the present braid themselves into a rope you can hold on to or use to draw lines. I thought of the time 2 years back when Ashley had corrected a nurse who asked me if I was the one to sign the form for Michael's medication. His wife will do that, she'd said, and I had taken a step back because she wasn't wrong legally, and yet I felt myself recede to a place I didn't like. I thought of the time last winter when she told me cheerfully that she had consolidated the mail because it was piling up and handed me a neat stack with 3 envelopes missing. Condolence cards addressed to me that I found later, unopened, in a bag with returns for a clothing store. I thought of the thermostat set so low last week, my fingers went stiff, and she had said, it's more efficient, and I had put on an extra sweater and told myself the fullness of my life would warm me. I thought of the locks changed without my knowing, and the deadbolt slid, and the word boundaries said, as if it were a prayer. Harder, I said, not unkindly. Would be me leaving. I am not leaving. Saturday arrived with a sky the color of a bruise fading to soft yellow. People came. They always do. They came with Pyrex and foil and paper plates because there is a particular American holiness to feeding one another on a weekend afternoon when grief and relief share a table. Daniel came with the cooler and chairs and a toolbox he put on the porch like a statement. Mr. Carter arrived with his wife, a woman with a blue cardigan and eyes that understood. Mrs. Holloway brought her deviled eggs lined up like small moons. The kids from next door rode their bikes in circles until their parents hissed their names and they dismounted and leaned their bikes against the fence as if staking claim. At 10 minutes to 2, the realtor arrived with a couple in tow and a smile that might have worked better at a bank. "Welcome," she said crisply, and then visibly recalibrated as she took in the crowd and the folding chairs and the table with photographs I had set up under the big living room window. There was Michael in his Little League uniform, Michael at prom in a tuxedo 2 sizes too big, Michael at the plant Christmas party with wrapping paper on his head like a crown. "Oh," she said to Ashley, her voice low and tight. "I didn't realize." Ashley flushed. "I asked." She started, then stopped. For a second she looked younger, the girl with the beret at the winter dance, and my heart did something foolish and maternal even in my annoyance. "We can still," she said to the couple, gesturing weakly toward the hallway. "You can see the kitchen." "We'll wait," the woman said, surprisingly kind. "We can come back later if this is a family thing. It's a community thing." Daniel said from the porch, carrying a stack of plates and smiling with a warmth that made even the realtor set down her clipboard. At the maple, Daniel had fastened a small wooden plaque to a stake we could press into the earth. It had Michael's name burned into it with the years he lived on either side like open arms. We gathered around the tree. The children stood close, the way children do when they know something important is happening, even if no one is crying. Ashley stood a little apart, arms crossed, the way a person protects herself in wind. I held the paintbrush. I hadn't planned to, but there it was in my hand, the bristles soft from soaking, the handle smooth from years of use. I looked at the key ribbon around my neck and felt its small weight. I took one breath and then another. I could speak without shaking. I had practiced in my head all night until the sentences felt like they belonged to me. Michael loved this tree, I said. He liked the way it told the truth about the seasons without making a big speech. He liked that you could tell, by the sound the leaves made when rain was coming, how they rubbed their hands together and whispered to each other. People smiled, and I wasn't the only one who looked up at the canopy and listened for a sound we'd all heard 1,000 times and never named. When we painted this house, I continued, lifting the brush a little, we made a mess and then we cleaned it up. That's how we lived here. We were not careful in the ways that matter less and steady in the ways that matter more. This brush, I said, feeling a little ridiculous and not at all caring, isn't just a thing. It's us making a mark. It's Michael's hand. It's mine. It's the line we drew along the baseboards and said, "This is our home." I could feel Ashley's gaze on me, hot and contained. I didn't look at her. I looked at the faces that knew me before I was anyone's mother and after, faces that had watched me in the grocery store holding a toddler with one hand and a bag of flour with the other, faces that had seen Tom's casket go down the aisle of the Methodist church when people still wore black for a month. "I am staying," I said simply, and the way the words came out told everyone they were not an invitation to argue. Michael arranged it. He wrote it. He wanted me to have a key, and I do. I touched the ribbon at my throat. I will share the kitchen and the porch light when you need it. I will share the smell of pies and fresh paint, and when the porch needs resealing, Daniel and I will handle it. I will not be pushed aside with words like boundaries and easier and eventually. We can make a life here that doesn't erase anybody. I turned then to Ashley because not looking felt like a cowardice I didn't want to practice. Her face had gone very still. Her eyes were shiny, but not yet spilling. "You are Michael's wife," I said. "You will make choices. You will build whatever comes next in your life with the energy you have." I held up the brush a little, like a silly baton at a band concert. "But this is a place where love doesn't move out just because grief rearranges the furniture. I won't be quiet to make it easier. I will be kind, and I will be here." Ashley's mouth trembled. She looked for a second like someone who had run a long way and didn't know if she had arrived or if there were miles left. The realtor had the grace to step back and fold her hands. The couple by the porch eased onto the step and sat like neighbors. Mr. Carter stood with his hands clasped in front of him, eyes on the tree like a man saying grace in a way that doesn't call attention to himself. "May I?" he asked, and when I nodded, he spoke in a soft voice that carried nonetheless. "Michael said to me, in a sentence I wrote down and have repeated in my head since, that his mother kept him inside that house when storms came. He asked us to honor that. We can honor that and live. Those things aren't opposed. We pushed the stake into the soft earth together, my hands, Daniel's, Mr. Carter's, pressing it down while the children watched solemnly as if we were planting something that would grow. In a way, we were. A declaration. After, we ate. Plates were filled. The realtor took a slice of apple pie and said, a little sheepish, "This is very good." Ashley stood near the kitchen island, not eating, not moving much. I went to her. Because loving a person isn't something you unlearn overnight, even if they have hurt you, even if you are angry enough to want to throw plates. "You didn't have to embarrass me," she said, a whisper that didn't quite ask for forgiveness and didn't quite refuse it. "I did not intend to," I said, because intention matters even when it isn't everything. I intended to set the table. I feel like the floor under me changes every 5 minutes, she admitted, surprising both of us. He was here, and then he wasn't. And then I thought I could if I kept moving, if I made choices, if I made everything clean, maybe I would be ahead of it. And then you with your... She waved a hand toward the brush without looking at it. Your tokens. I don't know how to be the grown-up in a house where I feel like a child. I don't either, I said. I don't know how to be the grown-up in a world where my boy isn't in it. I reached for the closest true thing. We can be grown-ups together. She nodded once, then again. I won't list it, she said, voice so small I almost didn't hear it over the sound of Mrs. Holloway's laugh in the living room. Not now. I'll wait. We'll figure it out. It wasn't a surrender. It was a stay. There is a difference. I let myself feel it like sun on the back of my hand. As the afternoon softened into a kind of evening that feels like a sigh, people drifted home with empty pans hidden under tea towels and promises to return made in voices that meant them. The couple from the porch shook our hands and wished us peace and said they'd look elsewhere because a house has to want you too. The realtor, to her credit, told Ashley she would touch base next month and not before. Daniel and I carried the chairs back to the garage. He saw the brush in the jar and smiled without speaking. He knew a symbol when he saw one. He was a person who kept bolts sorted in jars and understood that organization isn't about control, it's about care. We loaded the dishwasher and folded the card table and set the leftover pie in the refrigerator. It looked smaller in there, the way food does when you put it away after a gathering, as if it knows its job is done. When the last person left, Ashley and I stood at the door, and for a moment we were two women 3 feet apart who had managed not to break something delicate. You can keep the bowl on the counter, she said suddenly, a little rush of words. And the cat on the sill, and the paintbrush. I didn't know about the trees telling the weather. I like that. Thank you, I said. It was not nothing. That night, I hung the key on its ribbon on a little nail next to the door, a place where you'd reach for it without thinking. I set the paintbrush beside it. 2 ordinary tools, 2 reminders. The letter went back to the table by the window, under the little dish with pebbles I'd collected with Michael on a walk around the lake when he was 6 and interested in nothing more than how many stones made a pile. Before bed, I walked out to the maple with a watering can, even though it didn't need it. I poured a little circle around the plaque's stake and touched the top of the wood where his name was warm from the day. The street was quiet. The neighbor's dog softly woofed at a squirrel he couldn't see. A car drove by and the driver waved without knowing why. On my way back in, I stopped on the porch. The flashing Daniel had fixed glinted like a new seam, tight and purposeful. I could hear the house behind me breathing the way houses do when they settle. I stood there and thought of everything that had pressed on me in the past weeks. The bleach and the boxes and the thermostat set low. The deadbolt I didn't turn. The word boundaries wielded like a broom. The postcards that acted like foregone conclusions. I also thought of small kindnesses. Mrs. Holloway's simple, good, Daniel's toolbox, Mr. Carter's steady voice, and my own small bravery, the kind that dresses itself in a key on a ribbon and a paintbrush in a jar. People will tell you that the moment of enough arrives with a clap of thunder. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it arrives like a door opening easily because the lock you were pushing against is finally turned. My enough had not been a shout. It had been an invitation with potato salad and folding chairs. It had been me saying, plainly, I am here. Inside, I turned out the kitchen light and pressed my palm flat on the counter, the cool surface steady under my hand. The blue bowl sat where I had placed it. The paintbrush leaned in its jar. The little ceramic cat looked out at the tree. I took one last breath and headed down the hall to the guest room that smelled faintly of lavender and apple. The quilt on the bed was soft under my fingers, the squares telling stories only I knew in a language not for translation. In the morning, the sun found the plaque through the maple leaves and made the letters flash for just a second. Ashley came downstairs in slippers, hair undone, eyes less guarded. She poured herself a cup of coffee and set it next to mine. We didn't say much. We didn't rush, either. The house felt, for the first time in a month, the way it had always promised to be. Quiet, not from absence, but from safety, like a deep stream under snow. I took the paintbrush from the jar and ran my fingers over the bristles one more time. I might touch up the trim in the front room, I said into the future, not asking permission, not daring either. It always looked better with a little love. Ashley nodded. Okay, she said. And that single word, spoken soft, was not a settlement and not a defeat. It was a space cleared, a mutual step inside. I tucked the brush back and set my mug on the counter near the bowl, and the sound it made was as ordinary and holy as any bell I've ever heard. Outside, the maple whispered to the light. Inside, my heart, steady now, answered. Outside, the maple whispered to the light. Inside, my heart, steady now, answered. The next morning felt like a gift wrapped in ordinary paper. The plaque by the tree caught sun again, and the letters at Michael's name glinted as if nodding. I watered the new bulbs I had planted with neighbors' help. Tulips, the kind that bow politely in spring and insist on returning year after year. There was a rhythm to those small acts that steadied me. The scoop of soil, the press of a root ball into earth, the soft tamping to close the gap. It felt like mending something more than a yard. Neighbors dropped by through the week in the way neighbors in our town do, with casseroles that smelled like Sunday afternoons, with small updates about who had lost a tooth and which kid had finally scored a goal. Mrs. Holloway brought over a jar of preserved peaches and told me about her granddaughter's ballet recital. You sang at the coffee hour at church last month, she said, with a hint of pride. And I thought, that Patricia, she's still got music in her. I smiled and accepted the jar like someone accepting an extension of the porch, a promise that life could be ordinary and also tethered to memory. Daniel stopped by one afternoon with the kind of practical energy that looks like a friend carrying a toolbox and a prayer. He'd fixed the flashing on the back porch, tightened a few loose planks on the step, and found the nail that had been the culprit behind the door that stuck. He is a man who understands that care looks like bolts and gasoline and time. He stayed for coffee and listened to my stories about Michael when he was small, about how he used to bury his toes in the sandbox and shout when he found a gem. Daniel told me little things Michael had said at the plant that made me laugh until my chest hurt in the best way. You did good, he said at one point, handing me a leftover donut he'd smuggled from the bakery. You set the table. I live for sentences like that. They're small and precise and true. Ashley and I's days continued to be an exercise in relearning each other's edges. She and I had always inhabited different maps of the world, she with careful lines and itineraries that took the future in stride, me with a toolbox of memories and a habit of sticking to the places I knew. But the parties we negotiated, her meetings, my mornings, slowly learned to coexist. She agreed to text me when she scheduled consultations and to give me a day's notice if she needed contractors in the house. I agreed to ask before rearranging boxes or moving obvious things she used every day. The first real step toward a truer peace came on a rainy Tuesday. There was a small list taped to the fridge: paint trim in the living room, call the HVAC for a tune-up, fix the fence post that leaned like someone tired. I looked at the paintbrush in the jar, the one with the pale green crust along its ferrule, and I thought of the way Michael had leaned on the ladder and joked about being the official hire painter. I sent Ashley a message. Want to pick a color and do the upstairs trim together? There'll be pie when we're done. She texted back with 3 emojis I had to look up: a paint palette, a coffee cup, and a heart. She arrived at 10 a.m., hair pulled back, an armful of paint swatches like flags from a country I was only now learning the language of. We drove to the hardware store together. No grand gestures, no paparazzi, just 2 women in a rental car arguing quietly about muted versus eggshell white. We complained about the fluorescent lights in the aisle and agreed that the Home Depot cashier's banter about coupon codes was a comfort of its own. When we returned, we made it a day. We sanded the baseboards the way you peel an onion, slow and careful, then laid down drop cloths and taped with the precision that had once been Ashley's alone. She taught me a few tricks with the brush, the way she steadied her wrist and turned the brush like coaxing a phrase out of a shy witness. I taught her about patience, how to wait for paint to dry between coats so the line stays honest. We worked in silence sometimes, and sometimes we swapped memories we were both guarding carefully. Midway through the second coat, she laughed at something I said about Tom's singing voice, something I hadn't heard anyone laugh at in years, and the sound surprised both of us. At the end of the day, our hands were paint-speckled and our cheeks flushed. We sat on the stoop with lemonade and ate the last of the apple pie Daniel had brought. That night, the paint line in the living room looked like a ribbon we had tied together. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a softness toward the future that wasn't a betrayal of the past. Mr. Carter called to check in. He's the sort of man whose voice suggests quiet wisdom and a little tiredness from long legal days. "You did well at the gathering," he said. "It was the right thing." "It felt right," I answered, "like a place we could all breathe in." "There may be paperwork later about repairs," he warned, "but it's best when the disputes are fewer and the conversations more. You did something smart." "What's that?" I asked. "You opened a door," he said plainly. "Sometimes lawyers get to seal things, but it's people who keep the place alive. You did that." That was the sort of compliment that landed like a warm hand on your shoulder. Not everything smoothed out overnight. There were moments, an unexpected bill mailed to the wrong address, a contractor who overpromised, a florist who misheard a delivery date, that tested us. But each time, we navigated it together with the sort of pragmatism Michael would have approved of. We made lists on the fridge and initial decisions on a little shared pad. It wasn't about legalese, it was about respect. When Ashley proposed a plan to consult each other for major changes, I suggested we add a clause of humanity. Coffee before conclusions. She laughed and wrote it in. "Deep in my marrow, I know that grief never vanishes. It grows thinner in the daylight, but it's always there like the shadow under the eaves." What shifted was how we let grief live among us without letting it bulldoze everything else. We started small rituals, Sunday lunches after church, potato salad and deviled eggs one week, leftover chili reheated another, where we sat around the table sharing scraps of the past and planning tiny things in the future. Daniel brought his toolbox like he was bringing offerings. Mrs. Holloway's granddaughter showed up sometimes with art she insisted we hang in the guest room. And the key, my son's key, kept its place. I hung it on a little brass nail by the back door, and each morning I touched it like a blessing. Sometimes I would lift it and remember Michael pressing it into my palm with that serious smile. It was a small thing with scratched edges that had become a compass. When I tightened the nail or polished its ribbon, it felt less like holding on to grief and more like holding on to permission. Permission to stay, to feel, to be somebody who belonged in a house that had grown around her. Months slid by in the company of neighbors and small repairs. In the fall, we held a small memorial, nothing large, just a handful of people and a pot of coffee, under the maple tree. The kids from next door tied ribbons on the plaque's stake. Ashley brought photos from the plant party and a playlist of songs Michael liked. We remembered things that made us laugh and things that made us sigh, and everyone left with a slice of pie and a little more peace. The deeper reconciliation with Ashley was not a sudden surrender, but a slow knitting back together. One evening, after a long day of painting the porch railings, she had insisted on painting with a small brush because she liked the control. She found an old photo in a box we had both overlooked. Michael at 6, covered in mud from head to toe, with a crooked grin and watermelon seeds stuck in his teeth. The photo had been taken by me, a clumsy shot, but perfect. She held it, and something in her relaxed. "I kept this," she said quietly, and for the first time it sounded like an admission rather than a declaration of ownership. "So did I answered, and we both laughed because of course we had. We had both kept so many little things that were his, like a duet. From that day, our conversations began to include the little practicalities with less friction. She started calling Daniel when she needed a hand instead of telling me what she planned and expecting me to reorganize. I started asking her about her work and actually listening to the details of her day. We learned to ask for help and to offer it without strings. There were still tight hours, days when the grief was a raw, tender thing that needed solitude. But those times became temporary, not permanent states. One afternoon, while I was trimming the rose bushes along the walkway, my sister called from Florida. Her voice was all sun and sand. "Are you sure you don't want to come down?" she asked kindly. Sometimes, when the wind stirs in a certain way and the maple's leaves chatter like a friendly crowd, I think of the life I might have had if I'd taken other roads. There's a pull to the fixed idea of escape. An ocean and a rocking chair and someone bringing iced tea on a tray. But I looked at the house, the porch we had painted, the plaque by the maple, the key at its nail, and I felt a contentment that had nothing to do with escape and everything to do with roots. I told my sister I loved her and I'd visit, and I meant it. Then I asked her to save the best floral afghan for me when I did go. I promised myself I would make the trip when the holiday lights came down and the air was cooler. There was a particular night in December when the house felt like the thing it had always promised: warm, imperfect, alive. It snowed just enough to make the maple look like it was wearing a shawl. Ashley and I hung a strand of lights together, sitting close on the porch steps with gloves on, the frigid air making our cheeks bright. We didn't speak for a while because it was enough to be there. Two women, two generations, both wanting to hold on in the best way. "You know," she said finally, "I was terrified the day he died that if I stopped moving I would be swallowed. I was terrified I would be pushed so far back I would become air," I said. We sat with that truth like two people lighting candles. When the lights went on, they blinked like a small choir. I put my hand under the ribbon of the key at my neck, feeling its small, familiar weight. The paintbrush leaned in its jar by the door like an old sentinel. Those two objects had become more than tools. They were the language we had invented for ourselves, key for belonging, brush for the work of making things true. "Thank you for staying," Ashley said then, without explanation. "No," I answered. "Thank you for letting me." We were both quiet then, but not in the empty way of absence. It was a soft, full quiet, the kind that says we are both here and that is enough. Life, mercifully, continued. The house saw celebrations and small defeats. We argued about the thermostat from time to time, and she taught me how to use the thermostat app on my phone when I was being stubborn about the digital world. I taught her how to stitch a button so it won't come off in a week. We hosted birthday dinners and a Thanksgiving where we set 3 tables because people kept bringing more friends. Each meal, each repair, each little ritual built a scaffolding for the grief we both carried. We learned to talk about Michael as if talking about the weather, present, sensible, unavoidable. One afternoon, when the light fell through the living room window at the exact angle where the photograph of Michael at prom caught it, I picked up the paintbrush and, on impulse, wrote his initials in a corner of the porch beam where no one would easily see them. It was a small, private thing, like tucking a note into a Bible. The initials were a promise I could touch. They weren't conspicuous, and they didn't need to be. They were a single stroke of someone's hand that said he had been here and that we would not pretend otherwise. If you ask me what I learned, I would say this: a house is more than walls and a roof. It is a repository of weathered promises, of laughter and burnt toast and cooler air after a storm. A house remembers who you were when you tended it. Keys and brushes are small objects, and they can be polished or neglected, but their truest power is symbolic. They remind us that we can open doors and make marks on the world. My son's key opened the door for me in a legal sense, but in a truer sense, it opened permission to keep belonging. The paintbrush taught me that to live is to make marks, sometimes messy ones, and that those marks leave a story you can touch. One evening, a neighbor's child asked me if Michael was an angel now. I sat on the porch swing and looked at the maple and the plaque, and I told the child that Michael had gone into a different kind of weather, but he was still here in the maple's song and in the pie cooling on the sill and in the way his laugh clung to the rafters. The child nodded solemnly and, as children do, moved on to chase a stick with new fervor. I watched him go and felt at peace. The final piece of settling was not a legal document or a dramatic conversation. It was smaller, Ashley teaching me to make a playlist for the porch in the evenings, and me teaching her how to braid tulip bulbs with twine the way my mother braided bread dough. We built a life together out of dishwashing and paint-stained gloves, out of scheduling contractors and making pie crust. We argued and reconciled and learned the rhythms of forgiveness. Months later, in the warm wind of spring, when the maple's leaves were a bright, unapologetic green and the plaque was becoming part of the landscape, I stood on the porch with the paintbrush and the key in my hand. I looked out at the street where people passed with their dogs and strollers and remembered the woman who had sat on the porch the first week after the funeral, clutching an envelope and wondering if the door would stay open to her. I raised the brush to the post and painted a tiny heart around Michael's initials. It was a private ceremony, no speeches, no gathering, just an act of love. The paint smelled of turpentine and possibility. The key at my throat warmed with the heat of the day and with the warmth of being allowed to belong. We learned to live with grief like a companion rather than an invader. The house became our shared project, sometimes messy, sometimes hilarious, always honest. Ashley and I found a way to be two women who had loved the same man and yet could make room for one another. I had my key. She had her life. We had a table. We had a porch. We had, finally, peace. If this story touched you, please leave a comment and tell me about the small objects that hold your memories. If you found yourself smiling at the apple pie or feeling a little braver about holding your own keys, please give this a like and subscribe so we can keep sharing these small, true things together. Thank you for coming onto my porch for a while. Stay as long as you like.